A microscopic parasite is causing explosive diarrhea pretty much across the U.S. But health authorities don't know where it's coming from. There have been thousands of cases of cyclosporiasis, and it's spreading rapidly. 31 of the 50 U.S. states have recorded cases, with most of them in Michigan. So where is it coming from? Why is it spreading so far? And what can people do to protect themselves? We're going to try to get some answers with Donald Schaffner, food safety expert and distinguished professor of food science at Rutgers University. Don, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Don, how do people catch this parasite, and what happens to them when they do?
So there's probably two main ways that people might encounter the parasite. First would be in food, and the second would be in water. And then once you've ingested the parasite, it's probably somewhere between a couple of days to maybe as much as 2 weeks, and then you'll begin to experience symptoms. The primary characteristic symptom is watery diarrhea, or you may see it in the news as explosive diarrhea, and that's certainly no fun.
And there have been no deaths so far. This is treatable, I believe. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, it is treatable. It's treatable with an antibiotic, an old school antibiotic that's a sulfa drug. And there are people that are allergic to sulfa drugs. So if you're allergic to sulfa drugs, then unfortunately you don't have much recourse except to ride it out. And it's a pretty brutal disease. If you choose to ride it out, you'll have this watery diarrhea, and then you'll get better, and then the diarrhea will come back, and you'll get sick again. And eventually, if you're healthy, you don't have a compromised immune system, eventually you will clear the parasite. But of course, if you can take the antibiotics and the sulfa drug antibiotics, that's the way to go.
How does it get on the food or in the water in the first place?
That's a great question. We're still learning a lot about this microorganism. It really only came onto our radar in the United States in the mid-1990s, when we had an outbreak linked to raspberries from Guatemala. We believe that it gets on fresh produce from contaminated water, either irrigation water or pesticide makeup water, or maybe flooding of fields. But there's still a lot we don't know about this organism.
And the organism itself is called cyclospora. Is it harder to trace than other parasites?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily harder than other parasites, but it certainly is more complicated compared to other microorganisms that cause foodborne disease. So we have a lot of foodborne disease linked to bacteria, and our technology for genetically sequencing those bacteria, coming up with whole genome sequences, being able to match one case of E. coli food poisoning to another case of E. coli poisoning, that's pretty straightforward. Cyclospora, because it's a parasite, it doesn't grow outside the body, and our ability to do that genetic fingerprinting is just not nearly as developed. So it's harder to match up people that might have been exposed to the same source.
I'm asking if it's harder to trace because there are thousands of people across much of the U.S. who've now gotten sick from this. Why have health authorities not been able to identify where it's coming from?
Well, I would say in this particular case, it's probably multiple outbreaks. They're not necessarily linked. What we know is that we see cases in the United States rise in the summer months between May and August. And FDA has on their website several different cyclospora outbreak investigations, which are not at this time linked, or at least they're not linked on the FDA website. I think what's driving a lot of the news is what's going on right now in Michigan and Ohio. In counties that border Lake Erie, we see this huge increase in the number of cases. I'm not convinced that those cases are linked to any of the other cases in the United States. And I think in particular, those cases might be, because of the geographical pattern of the cases, I think they might be linked to water, either swimming in contaminated water, or sewage overflows, or maybe contaminated well water systems. And so I think that fundamentally what's going on in that part of the United States is different than what's going on in other parts of the U.S.
How would investigators go about trying to trace the source of this?
It's complicated. A lot of it is sort of boots on the ground epidemiology. And so you have a bunch of people that are sick with the same symptoms. Once you realize that it's sick with the same microorganism, then you begin the long, hard job of asking people, hey, and again, remember, this is a long incubation period, anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. So then now you have a sick person who maybe didn't enter into the system until a couple of weeks after they started their illness. And you're going to ask them what foods you ate or where you went swimming a month ago. So it's really hard because of the length of time between possible exposure and then diagnosis and then interview. So we're dealing with people's memories, and we're dealing with data that there are things that happened weeks ago.
And does having so many, well, in the few thousands of cases, but does having so many cases, thousands of cases, make it easier or harder to figure this out?
Well, having more cases should make it easier, but remember, then each of those people will need to be interviewed by a human being, and they'll need to sit down and collect a detailed history. And then once you've got that data, then you have to begin to do that analysis to look for statistical patterns to see, are these people getting sick from the same source or maybe from different sources? So, and of course, public health is not in great shape right now in the United States. And so making sure that we have the resources to do that epidemiology at the federal level especially is a challenge.
The Trump administration, you mentioned, since last year has cut resources for programs that monitor foodborne illnesses or waterborne illnesses, as this may be. Do you think that those cuts have made an impact?
Well, certainly those cuts are not a good thing. And I certainly wish now we had the ability to roll back the clock and not have those cuts. It's difficult to prove that those specific cuts are harming us now or slowing our response now. But it certainly seems like that's a reasonable thing to think about. And we know, public health is important. And I don't think those cuts should have happened.
So your theory, at least, is that the epicenter of this outbreak in Michigan, also in Ohio, may be linked to water, to swimming in lakes. Do you have a sense that the outbreaks or the cases in other parts of the United States may still be linked to food? And if so, what products might they be linked to?
Yeah, I think that they probably are linked to food, or they may be linked to food. Again, outbreaks investigations are still ongoing. What we can do, and you see this in the news media, you can see listings of foods that have caused outbreaks in the past. Things like snow peas and raspberries and mixed lettuce and things like that. I don't think that's particularly helpful because it really theoretically could be caused by any fresh produce item. Of course, it could be caused by other things as well, but mostly when we eat fresh produce, it's right there in the name, right? We're eating it fresh. It hasn't been through any sort of a treatment step or a cooking step.
Right. So what do people do if they still want to eat fruits and veggies, as we should? Should they be avoiding fresh food at this point? Is there still a way to eat fruits and vegetables safely?
Well, I think people should realize that most fresh fruits and vegetables are actually not contaminated with cyclospora. After we finish tonight, I'm going to go eat dinner, and I'm going to have a salad made with fresh vegetables, and I'm not going to really worry too much about it. There's not a lot. And the other thing to realize too, if you have a situation where it's fresh produce causing this outbreak, and I mentioned before the long delay between exposure or consumption and then diagnosis of the illness. If it's truly fresh produce and you got sick from, let's say, raspberries that you ate 4 weeks ago, well, guess what? There's not going to be any more of those raspberries on the market because they will have spoiled already. So again, my suggestion to people is pay attention, monitor the news, see what FDA and CDC are saying. But at the same time, fresh fruits and vegetables are healthy and we should eat them. And I'm going to do some of that today.
And no extra washing needed, or is there something people can do to the veggies?
Certainly, I'm probably going to rinse off the fruits and vegetables that I'm going to put in my salad tonight if they haven't already been washed. Realize that washing is not a terribly effective intervention. It may remove up to 90% of microorganisms on a contaminated piece of produce, but realize that when produce is contaminated, it may have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of microorganisms, and it might not take very many of those organisms to make us sick. So washing is really not going to do a lot, unfortunately.
All right. Well, We're still going to wash our fruits and veggies anyway and just hope for the best. Donald Schaffner, thanks so much for talking to us.
My pleasure, David.
So how worried are you about this parasite? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this video useful, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I'm David Levitz. Thanks for watching.